Snow fell in soft, tired flakes that morning, like the sky itself had grown weary. The wind carried the sound of an empty field, the kind that whispers through cracks in broken fences and sighs against the sides of old barns. Inside the small cabin by the woods, a fire tried its best to stay alive, flickering low in the stone hearth. Its light trembled across the wooden floorboards and found the little figure lying beneath a thin wool blanket. His face was pale, his lips dry, and his small chest rose and fell with a sound that wasn't right too shallow. It's too slow. The boy's sister knelt beside him, one hand pressed against his forehead. Her fingers trembled as she felt the heat. She had tried to tell herself it wasn't fever, that maybe he'd just caught a chill from playing outside too long, but the truth was too heavy to ignore now. His skin burned hot, his breathing came in short gasps, and the color had left his cheeks like the last of summer fading from the land. Mama would know what to do, she whispered, her voice cracking. But Mama wasn't there. She'd been gone since last winter, and all that was left of her was the gold ring kept in a little wooden box under the bed. Outside, cold pressed against the windows, rattling the glass. The girl wrapped another old quilt around her brother and stood up, her eyes darting to the door. The nearest town was 7 miles away, maybe more, and the road there was half buried in snow. But she had no choice. He needed medicine. The girl was small and thin, maybe 12 or 13, but the way she looked at her brother made her seem older. There was a kind of steady courage in her that didn't come from age, but from necessity. Life on the prairie didn't leave room for softness. You either learned to stand up against it, or you disappeared. She pulled on her coat, patched in 3 places and still too short at the wrists, then tucked her hair under her scarf. Before she stepped out, she knelt again by her brother. "I'll be back before the fire dies," she said. His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't speak. The path to town wound through bare trees and frozen fields. Each step crunched beneath her boots. The snow was deeper than she thought, and her breath came out in white clouds. The wind bit her cheeks, turning them red. She held her arms tight against her chest. Thinking of the warmth she'd left behind, the only warmth left in that cabin, she thought of her mother then. Her soft voice, the way she used to hum when she stirred soup or hung laundry on the line. The memory made the girl's chest ache. That ring Mama had worn, it wasn't fancy, not like the jewelry the women in town wore, but it had meaning. It was the only piece of her that still remained. Selling it or trading it would be like letting go of her all over again. But what was the worth of gold if her brother didn't make it through the night? When she finally saw the outline of the town through the curtain of falling snow, her legs felt like they might give out. It wasn't much of a town, just a cluster of buildings along a muddy main road. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and the dim yellow glow of lamps flickered through frosted windows. The sound of a blacksmith's hammer echoed faintly from somewhere down the street. She headed toward the general store first. The man there was known for having everything from nails to cough syrup, though his kindness was harder to come by. When she pushed open the door, a bell above it gave a small ring. The man behind the counter looked up from his ledger. His face was hard, lined from years of squinting at numbers and sun. "Morning," he said flatly. "What do you need, girl?" She swallowed, stepping forward. "My brother's sick. He needs medicine." "What kind?" She hesitated. "The kind for fever and breathing. He can't stop coughing." The man nodded slowly, rubbing his chin. "I got something might help. But it ain't cheap. Costs 50 cents for a bottle." Her heart sank. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a small cloth pouch. Inside were a few coins, barely 15 cents. "This is all I have," she said, "but I have something else." She untied the pouch and carefully pulled out Mama's ring. The light in the store caught it, and for a moment it seemed to glow. The man leaned closer. "That gold?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "It was my Mama's." He turned it over in his hand, inspecting it. "It's worth more than 50 cents, I'll tell you that." He paused, squinting at her. "Where'd you get it?" "It was hers," she said again, her voice trembling. "Please, sir. My brother's burning up. He won't make it till morning." The man didn't answer right away. He really looked at her this time. The coat that barely fit, the scarf fraying at the edges, the fear hiding behind her eyes. Then he sighed, set the ring on the counter, and reached for a bottle behind him. "You take this," he said, "and keep your ring." Her eyes widened. "But just take it. Get that boy better." Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded, clutching the bottle to her chest. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Go on now," he said, waving her off. Storm's getting worse. She stepped outside, the snow thicker now, the wind sharper. She started down the road, her boots sinking deeper into the drifts. The medicine bottle was wrapped in her scarf, close to her heart. Each step back toward home felt heavier than the one before. The wind howled across the empty fields. She thought she heard her mother's voice in it, a faint, tender whisper urging her on. But the sky darkened faster than she expected. Night was coming early, swallowing the world in gray. Her footprints filled behind her, disappearing as if she'd never passed through. The cold cut through her coat, numbing her fingers. She stumbled once, then again. The bottle nearly slipped from her grasp, but she caught it just in time. She pressed on, fighting the snow that rose to her knees. Somewhere ahead was the cabin, the small glow of firelight that meant home. When she finally saw the faint outline of the chimney through the trees, relief washed over her. But as she drew closer, something felt wrong. The smoke from the chimney was gone. The fire had gone out. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the door. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold. The blanket had slipped from her brother's face, and he lay still. Too still. She rushed to his side, her hands shaking. "I got it," she whispered, pulling the bottle from her coat. "I got the medicine."
How?
She lifted his head, trying to get a response. "You hear me? You're going to be fine now." But there was no answer. The silence pressed in on her like the snow outside. For a long moment, she just knelt there, frozen. Then, somewhere in the quiet, she thought she heard a faint breath. Weak, but there. She blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. He was still alive. Barely, but alive. She poured a small spoonful of the medicine, her hands trembling, and lifted it to his lips. The wind outside howled against the walls as if urging her to hurry. The bottle glinted faintly in the firelight as she whispered, "Please, let it work." The boy stirred, a soft cough escaping him. His eyelids flickered open for just a second, then closed again. She looked toward the window, where the snow kept falling heavier and heavier, burying everything in white. She didn't know if morning would come in time more, if help would ever reach them out there, but she stayed by his side, holding his hand tight, whispering to him through the long, bitter night. And as the storm raged on, the faint crack of distant hoofbeats echoed through the woods. Growing closer with every passing breath, the hoofbeats grew louder. Steady against the frozen ground, echoing through the woods like a slow drum. The girl froze, her hand still clutching her brother's. The sound didn't belong to the wind or the tree, it was real. Someone was coming. She stood and moved toward the window, brushing away the frost with her sleeve. Through the haze of falling snow, she could just make out a dark figure on horseback. The rider was moving slowly, leaning forward as though weighed down by the storm. Her heart raced. Out here, no one came by accident. Maybe it was someone from town, the storekeeper, or one of the farmers who lived farther down the road. Or maybe it was someone she didn't want to meet. Her father used to say the woods could hide both good men and bad, and you never knew which kind you'd find until it was too late. The horse stopped just outside the cabin. The girl stepped back, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She heard the creak of leather, the soft thud of boots in the snow. Then a knock on the door, slow, deliberate. She hesitated. Then, before she could decide, a voice came through the door, deep and rough. "You got a fire still burning in there?" Her voice came out small. It went out. "Who are you?" "Just someone looking for a bit of shelter," the voice replied. "Storm's getting worse." She looked at her brother. He was still breathing, though faintly. The cold was creeping back in, biting through her clothes. She knew she couldn't keep the door closed forever. Finally, she lifted the latch and opened it. The man standing there looked worn by the road, his coat heavy with snow. His beard untrimmed, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He carried a small pack and led his horse by the reins. "Didn't mean to frighten you," he said softly. Just need a place to wait out the night. She nodded, stepping aside. You can come in. But my brother's sick. I don't want him catching worse. The man entered quietly, stamping the snow from his boots. He looked around the small cabin, taking in the bare shelves and the weak light from the dying embers. You're out here alone? He asked. Our mama's gone, she said. Been just us since last winter. He set his pack down and crouched by the hearth, stirring the ashes. Got any wood left? A little, she said, pointing to the pile near the door. He fed a few logs into the fire, coaxing the flame back to life. Soon, the warmth began to creep across the room again. She watched him carefully, unsure what to think. He didn't seem dangerous. But there was something heavy in the way he moved, like a man carrying more than just his pack. When the fire caught, sat back on his heels and rubbed his hands together. Name's Tom, he said finally. Used to pass through this way years ago when the logging camp was still running. Didn't know anyone still lived out here. The girl nodded but didn't give her name. Her brother stirred faintly behind her, letting out a weak cough. Tom's eyes flicked toward the sound. That him? Yes, she said. He's been burning up since last night. I went to town this morning for medicine. He nodded slowly. That's a long walk for someone your size. I didn't have a choice. There was a silence between them then, filled only by the crackle of the fire. Tom reached into his pack and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Here, he said, offering it to her. Dried venison. You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday. She hesitated, then took it. Thank you. He leaned back against the wall, staring into the flames. I had a sister once, he said quietly. Little thing, not much older than you. She got sick one winter. Fever, just like your brother. What happened? She asked. He didn't answer right away. The light flickered across his face, showing lines of grief carved deep. We couldn't get help in time, he said finally. Snow was too heavy. River was frozen. I still think about it even now. The girl looked down at the floorboards, her fingers tightening around the bundle of meat. I'm not letting that happen to him, she said. He's all I got left. Tom nodded, his gaze softening. Then you did the right thing coming here. Medicine'll help, if it's what he needs. Just gotta keep him warm and breathing steady. She sat beside her brother again, spooning a bit more of the medicine between his lips. He swallowed weakly, and she brushed the damp hair from his forehead. Tom watched in silence, the fire reflecting in his eyes. Outside, the wind howled harder. Snow beat against the shutters like 1,000 tiny fists. The horse snorted uneasily, and Tom stood to calm it through the small window. Storm's not letting up, he said. Could be snowed in by morning. The girl's stomach tightened. Then we'll just wait it out, he nodded. Best thing to do? He looked around, his gaze landing on a small box on the shelf, the one that held the ring. That your mama's? He asked quietly. Her eyes followed his. Yes, she must have been a good woman. She was, she said, her voice soft. She used to tell stories by the fire. About Papa in the old days. She said every piece of gold had a story, and that ring was hers. Tom gave a faint smile. My mama said something like that once. Said gold holds memory, same as people.
Oh.
The girl didn't answer. She just reached out and touched the box, her fingers tracing the worn edges. The weight of everything, the cold, the fear, the loneliness seemed to press down on her all at once. Tom cleared his throat. You said you went to town. Who helped you? The man at the general store, she said. He gave me the medicine. Didn't even take the ring. Tom's expression shifted, but it was hard to read. That's so? She nodded. Said I should keep it. He leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing. Strange. That man ain't known for generosity. Not since I can remember. Her eyes lifted. You know him? Used to, Tom said. A long time ago? He was a different kind of man back then. Fire popped, and the sound made her jump a little. Tom's gaze went distant, lost somewhere in his thoughts. You think he meant something by it? She asked. Tom hesitated. Maybe, or maybe he just saw something in you that reminded him what it means to help. He looked back toward the window where the snow still fell heavy and endless. Sometimes it takes the smallest thing to stir up old ghosts. Wow. The girl didn't know what he meant, but something in his tone made her uneasy. Hours passed like that, the two of them sitting in silence while the storm raged outside. The fire burned low again, and she fed it with the last of the wood. Her brother's breathing stayed shallow, but the fever seemed to ease a little. Tom dozed off near the door, his hat pulled low, but every so often, he'd wake and look toward the woods as though listening for something only he could hear. When the night stretched long and the wind began to quiet, the girl finally allowed her eyes to close. She drifted between dreams and waking, hearing faint sounds, the crackle of the fire, her brother's weak breath, the low creak of the cabin walls. Then another sound joined them, a different rhythm. She opened her eyes. The fire had dimmed to embers, and Tom was standing by the window again, his hand resting on the sill. "What is it?" she whispered. He turned slightly, his face half in shadow. "Riders," he said. "Two of them, coming from the direction of town." Her heart skipped. At this hour, he nodded slowly. "Looks like they're heading this way. Maybe they're just travelers." "Maybe," he said, his tone heavy. "Or maybe not." He moved toward his pack and began strapping it shut. She watched him, confusion and fear knotting in her stomach. Why would anyone come out here now? He didn't answer. He just checked the window again. The distant sound of hooves grew clearer. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom glanced back at her, his expression grim. "If it's who I think it is, we're in for trouble." The words hung in the air, thick and cold. The girl moved closer to her brother, clutching his hand. "Why would anyone want to come here?" "We don't have anything." Tom's eyes softened for a moment, but there was worry in them. "Sometimes it ain't what you have. It's what they think you're hiding." Outside, the hoofbeats stopped. The night fell silent, again so silent. Then came the sound of voices, low and muffled through the snow. The girl's pulse quickened. Tom stepped closer to the firelight, his hand resting near the old rifle hanging by the door. "Stay close to your brother," he said quietly. "And no matter what happens, don't open that door unless I tell you." She nodded, her breath shallow, her heart hammering in her chest. The knock came again, harder this time. Echoing through the cabin, Tom's eyes met hers, steady but full of warning. "It's going to be a long night," he said. And before she could speak, the door handle turned. The door shuddered under the weight of the knock, and the girl's breath caught in her throat. The cabin, small and frail against the storm, seemed to tremble with the sound. Tom's hand hovered near the old rifle on the wall, though he didn't reach for it yet. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on the door, sharp and alert. The girl held her brother's hand tighter, her body tense. A voice came from outside, muffled by the wind. "Tom, you in there?" He stiffened. The girl looked at him, her fear deepening at the change in his expression. Whoever was out there knew him? Tom stayed silent. The voice came again, louder this time. "We saw your horse outside." "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The girl's pulse quickened. "Who are they?" she whispered. Tom didn't answer at first. He walked slowly toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The faint orange glow of a lantern flickered in the snow. Two men stood near the edge of the trees, their coats pulled tight, faces hidden by the storm. He turned back to her. "You need to keep quiet," he said, his tone low but calm. "They're not here for you." The girl looked at her brother, still breathing weakly on the cot. "Then what do they want?" Tom hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Something I used to have. Something I took that wasn't mine." Before she could ask more, the knocking came again, sharper now. "Open up, Tom. We just want to talk." He moved toward the door but didn't open it. "You boys shouldn't be riding out in this weather," he called back. "Ain't safe." One of the men outside laughed, the sound hollow. "Don't worry about us. We're used to rough weather. You got something belongs to Mr. Carter, and he's getting tired of waiting." Tom's jaw tightened. "Tell Carter I ain't got it anymore. Then you won't mind if we come in and have a look around," the man replied. The girl's heart thudded in her chest. She could see Tom's hand twitch near the rifle now. His calm was fading, replaced by something heavier regret, mixed with fear. "You ain't coming in," he said firmly. The silence that followed was short. Then came the sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. Tom turned to the girl. "Get under the table. Stay down, no matter what you hear." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She helped her brother roll to one side, pulling the quilt up over him, then ducked under the table. From there, she could see the firelight flickering across the floor, shadows shifting as Tom moved closer to the door. The handle rattled again, and then the sharp crack of a shoulder slamming against the wood echoed through the cabin. Tom braced the door with his shoulder, his boots sliding slightly on the floorboards. "Don't do this," he shouted. A voice outside yelled back, "You know we have to." The door shook again. The girl bit her lip, holding her breath. Then, suddenly everything stopped. The wind howled outside, but the men had gone quiet. The girl's voice came out small and shaking. "Why are they after you?" He didn't turn from the window. "A long time ago, I worked for Carter. He runs the freight line through these parts goods, money, sometimes worse. I found something I shouldn't have, and took it before he could hide it. I thought I was doing right. What was it?" Tom looked at her then, his expression hard. Proof. Proof he'd been robbing the towns he claimed to help. He exhaled slowly. "Guess he wants it back." She glanced toward her brother, who stirred faintly in his sleep. "But why come here?" "Because they tracked me," he said simply. "Maybe saw my horse outside the store. Maybe someone talked. Doesn't take much." He moved back toward the door, the weight of decision heavy in his steps. "If they come in, don't make a sound. Promise me that." She nodded, fear pressing like a stone in her chest. The storm outside howled louder, carrying with it the sound of crunching snow closer this time. Tom's hand went to the rifle, and he lifted it carefully, the wood worn smooth from years of use. He didn't point it, just held it steady, his eyes locked on the door. The handle turned once more. "Tom," the voice outside said, "softer now. Last chance. Hand it over, and we'll be gone before daylight." Tom didn't move. "I don't have it, then. We'll take what's left." The words chilled her more than the wind ever could. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. Snow and cold air burst inside, and the two men stepped through, both armed, both with faces that looked like they'd long forgotten kindness. Tom raised the rifle, but the older one lifted a hand. "Easy now," he said. "Ain't no need for blood tonight." Tom didn't lower the gun. "You shouldn't have come here." The man took another step. "You took something, Tom. Carter just wants it back. I told you, it's gone." The younger man shifted nervously behind him. His coat was torn at the shoulder, his face half hidden beneath his hat. He looked no older than 20. "Then maybe we'll just take the horse instead," he muttered. Tom's eyes narrowed. "Touch that horse, and you'll regret it." The older man smirked. "Still got that temper, don't you?" He looked around the cabin, his gaze pausing on the small cot near the fire. "Didn't know you kept company now?" The girl held her breath under the table. The man's boots crunched closer. "What's this?" he asked. "You hiding something?" Tom stepped between him and the cot. "You take one more step, and I'll send you out in the snow without your boots." The younger man shifted, his hand going to his belt. "He's bluffing," he muttered. "Try me." Tom said quietly. The tension hung thick in the air, stretched so tight it felt like it might snap. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the soft, shallow breathing of the sick boy. Then, from outside, a new sound rose, the sharp neigh of a horse and another set of hoofbeats, fast and urgent. All three men turned toward the door. The older one frowned. "You bring someone else here?" Tom shook his head. "No." The sound grew louder. Whoever it was, they were coming fast. The riders in the doorway exchanged a look, unease flickering in their faces. Then a voice called from outside. "Sheriff's here. Drop it." The older man cursed under his breath. Damn fool must have followed the trail. Tom didn't move. The two intruders exchanged a glance, Then the younger one bolted out the door. The older followed, disappearing into the storm. Tom stepped forward, the rifle still in his hands, watching the door. Outside, he heard shouts, the crunch of boots, and then silence. The girl crawled out from under the table, her legs shaking. Who was that? Tom exhaled slowly. That'd be the sheriff from town. Must have been tracking them for days. He set the rifle down and ran a hand through his hair. Guess trouble follows me closer than I thought. The girl looked at him, her fear mixed with something else now, curiosity. What happens if the sheriff finds you here? Tom gave a tired smile. Depends on what he already knows. A few minutes later, the door creaked open again. A man stepped inside, his coat heavy with snow and a badge glinting on his chest. His voice carried authority, but not cruelty. Evening, he said, scanning the room. You folks all right? The girl nodded, clutching her brother's hand. Tom stood quietly by the fire, found two men running off toward the ridge, the sheriff said. Recognized one of them. Carter's men. Guess you've crossed paths before, Tom. Tom met his gaze. Looks that way. The sheriff studied him for a moment, then glanced at the girl and her brother. Didn't expect to find you with company. Just trying to keep them safe, Tom said. The sheriff nodded slowly. That so? Tom didn't answer. The wind whistled through the small cracks in the door, the fire sputtered, and for a moment, everything hung in uneasy balance. The sheriff turned his eyes back to Tom. You know, Carter's been stirring up trouble again. Folks say you've got something he wants. It's not anymore, Tom said quietly. Then you won't mind if we check around. The girl tensed, glancing toward the small box on the shelf, the one holding her mother's ring. The sheriff's eyes followed hers. He walked over, lifting the lid. Inside lay the ring, shining faintly in the firelight. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. Pretty piece, he said. Belonged to your mama. She nodded, her throat tight. He smiled kindly and set it back down. Don't worry. Not what I'm after. But when he turned back to Tom, the warmth left his face. Still, I'm going to need you to come with me till we sort this out. Tom didn't argue. He just nodded. Let me make sure the boy's stable first. The sheriff waited while Tom checked the child's pulse, adjusting the blanket around him. Then he looked at the girl. Keep that fire going, he said softly, and lock the door behind us. She wanted to ask what would happen to him, but the words wouldn't come. The sheriff opened the door, the snow rushing in once more. Tom paused at the threshold, his eyes meeting hers. Take care of your brother, he said quietly. And remember what I told you. Sometimes doing right brings trouble, but it's still worth it. Then he stepped out into the storm, disappearing into the white. The girl stood there, the firelight flickering on her face, listening as the hoofbeats faded into the distance, each one carrying a new uncertainty she couldn't name. The night pressed in again, colder and quieter than before. She turned toward her brother, the medicine bottle nearly empty beside the bed, and whispered, We'll make it through. Somehow. Outside, the storm began to ease, but in the distance, faint and haunting. Another sound rose, the low, distant cry of someone calling her name. The next morning came without color. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky hung low and gray, heavy with silence. The girl hadn't slept. She sat by the fire, her brother's hand resting in hers, her eyes raw from crying and watching the door. Every sound made her flinch, the groan of the wood, the hiss of cooling embers, the whisper of the wind slipping through the cracks. Tom was gone with the sheriff. The cabin felt emptier than ever. Her brother stirred faintly, his breath shallow, but warmer than before. The medicine had helped some, but not enough. The fever still clung to him like a shadow. She pressed a damp cloth to his forehead and whispered, Hold on. Please just hold on. Outside, the world was buried under a white hush. The path to town had vanished beneath the drifts, the fences hidden, the woods looking strange and new. She wanted to believe Tom would come back soon, that the sheriff would let him go once he told the truth. But a small part of her, the part that had learned too early how cruel the world could be, feared otherwise. She tried to keep busy. She fetched water from the barrel, stirred the fire, and checked the medicine bottle again, hoping there was more left than before. But the glass was almost empty. She knew she'd have to go back to town before nightfall if her brother's fever rose again by midday. The sky had darkened to the color of ash. A distant rumble rolled over the hills, the promise of another storm. She wrapped herself in her coat and stepped outside. The air was biting, but the quiet stretched so deep it almost felt wrong. Then, faintly, she saw hoofprints in the snow. Fresh ones. They led from the woods to the edge of the clearing, stopping near the barn. Her stomach tightened. Tom and the sheriff had left hours ago. These prints hadn't been there then. She crouched to look closer, brushing the snow away. The tracks were deep, pressed hard, as though whoever made them had been in a hurry. There were 2 sets of them. She straightened, her breath catching in her chest. Someone was out there again. She hurried back inside and barred the door. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows against the walls. Her eyes darted toward the small box on the shelf, the one that held Mama's ring. Tom's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes it ain't what you have. It's what they think you're hiding. Her brother stirred, mumbling something she couldn't make out. She rushed to his side, touching his cheek. "It's all right," she whispered, though she didn't believe it. A moment later came the sound she dreaded, a soft creak outside. The unmistakable crunch of snow beneath boots. Then another. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She moved toward the window and peeked out through a crack in the curtain. At first, she saw nothing but the white glare of daylight on snow. Then a shadow moved between the trees. 2 figures. One of them she recognized immediately, the younger man from last night. The one who'd fled when the sheriff arrived. His face was thinner now, his movements sharp and jittery. The man beside him was older, wrapped in a long, dark coat. She couldn't see his face, but something about the way he carried himself made her blood run cold. She ducked away from the window, her heart pounding. They were coming back for whatever Tom had taken. And if Tom was gone, they'd come to her instead. She ran to the small cupboard by the door, grabbed the old hunting knife her father had once kept. It was dull, the handle worn smooth, but it was all she had. She hid it under the table and took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. Outside, the men's voices drifted through the wind. "She's in there," the younger one said. "The tracks lead right to the door." "Good," the older man replied. "Then we'll get what we came for." The girl's throat tightened. She moved closer to her brother, whispering softly, "Don't wake up. Please, just stay still." A knock came at the door, sharp, cold, deliberate. "Little girl," the older voice called. "We ain't here to hurt nobody. We just need a word." She didn't answer. The man tried again. "Tom's gone. Sheriff took him, but he left something behind, didn't he? Something important." The silence stretched. She held her breath, not daring to move. Then the voice grew harder. "We don't want trouble, but if you make us come in, there'll be no turning back." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to scream for help, but the nearest neighbor was miles away. The wind outside swallowed every sound. Another knock, louder this time. Then the handle rattled. She backed away from the door, clutching her brother's blanket. The wood creaked as one of the men leaned against it, testing the latch. "Last chance," the man said. "You open up now, and we'll make this easy." She looked around the room, desperate. Her eyes landed on the trapdoor near the hearth, the small root cellar where they kept potatoes and preserves. It wasn't much, but it was a place to hide. She hurried to the cot and gently lifted her brother. He was light, far too light. His head lolled against her shoulder as she carried him to the trapdoor. She lifted it open and set him inside, tucking the quilt around him. "Stay quiet," she whispered, even though he couldn't answer. She lowered the door just as the latch on the front door snapped. The door swung open, slamming against the wall. Cold air rushed in, snow swirling across the floor. The two men stepped inside, shaking off their coats. The younger one grinned when he saw her. "Told you she'd still be here." The older man's eyes scanned the room, sharp and calculating. "Where is it?" he asked. She shook her head, backing away. "I don't know what you're talking about." He took a step closer. Tom had something that belongs to us. He told you, didn't he? I don't know anything. The man's gaze flicked to the small box on the shelf. That it? He asked before she could move. He strode across the room and opened the box. When he saw the ring, he froze. Well, I'll be, he said softly. Didn't expect it to be this. It's my mama's, she said, her voice trembling. You can't take it. He turned the ring over in his hand, examining it. Pretty little thing. Gold, just like he said? It doesn't belong to you. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Maybe not, but it belongs to the man who paid for it. Your friend Tom should have thought twice before stealing it. Her breath caught. Tom didn't steal anything. He looked at her, the kind of look that stripped away pretense. You really think you know who he is? The younger man laughed under his breath. She don't know half of it. The older man pocketed the ring and turned toward her. You're going to tell us where he went? I don't know, she said again, though her voice was barely more than a whisper. He took another step forward. The firelight flickered across his face now, and she saw the hard lines, the cold certainty in his eyes. I think you do, he said. She reached behind her, her hand finding the knife under the table. Her palms were slick with sweat. You need to leave, she whispered. The man raised a brow. And what'll you do if we don't? For a moment, the world went still. The only sound was the ticking of her heartbeat. Then a sound broke the silence, a faint creak from the trapdoor. Her brother had shifted in his. Sleep, both men froze. The older one's eyes snapped toward the noise. What was that? The girl's heart dropped. A rat, she said quickly. They get under the floor sometimes. He didn't believe her. He moved toward the trapdoor, his boots heavy on the boards. Sounds a bit big for a rat, he said. She stepped in front of him, blocking the way. Leave him alone. The younger man snickered. Guess we found what she's hiding. The older man reached out, grabbing her arm, not roughly, but with authority. Move aside, she yanked back, her voice breaking. You can't take him. He's sick. Something flickered in the man's eyes, then not anger, but a moment of hesitation. Sick. He needs the medicine, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. That's all we have. You already took the ring. Please, just go. The older man's jaw tightened. The younger one moved toward the trapdoor, but before he could touch it, a voice rang out from outside. Put your hands up. All three of them turned toward the door. Tom stood in the doorway, snow clinging to his coat. The sheriff behind him with his gun drawn. The younger man cursed, reaching for his weapon, but Tom moved first. Don't, he shouted. You don't want to do this. The cabin filled with tension so thick it was hard to breathe. The older man didn't move, his expression unreadable. You just don't know when to stop, do you, Tom? Tom took a step forward, his voice low and steady. This isn't the way. Let the girl go, and maybe Carter can still come out of this clean. Carter doesn't care about clean, the man replied. He wants what's his. He's got it, Tom said. In your pocket? The man's eyes narrowed. You mean this? He pulled the ring from his coat, the gold glinting in the firelight. That ring never belonged to Carter, Tom said. It belonged to her mother. You and him took it when you raided the settlement last winter? I found the rest of what you stole. The air in the room shifted. The truth hit the girl like a blow. Her mother's ring hadn't been bought or gifted, it had been taken. The man's face darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. The sheriff stepped closer, his voice firm. Then you won't mind explaining it in town. The younger man's hand twitched toward his belt again. The sheriff's voice snapped like a whip. Don't even think about it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The fire crackled, the wind moaned outside, and the world seemed to balance on a knife's edge. Then the older man smiled, a hard, dangerous smile. You think this ends here, Tom? He said. You got no idea what you've started. Tom didn't blink. Maybe not, but it ends tonight. The girl held her brother's hand under the floor, praying that this time, somehow, they would all make it through alive. The room was still as a graveyard. The older man's smile faded when he realized Tom wasn't backing down. The sheriff's revolver gleamed steady in the glow of the fire, trained right between his ribs. The wind howled through the open door, throwing snow across the floorboards. The girl stood frozen by the table, clutching the blanket in her trembling hands, her wide eyes shifting between the men. Her brother's faint breathing rose through the trapdoor, a quiet reminder of what this night had been about all along. "Drop it," the sheriff said again, his voice firm. The younger man hesitated, eyes darting toward his partner. The older man shook his head slightly, a silent command that said everything. But before he could speak, Tom stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His voice was calm, but there was a raw edge beneath it. "You had your chance to walk away. Don't make this worse." The older man looked at Tom with something between anger and regret. "You think you've done the right thing, but you've only stirred up trouble that'll follow you clear across the valley." Tom didn't answer. His jaw was set, his eyes locked on the man's. The sheriff moved in, one step at a time, his revolver unwavering. "It's over," he said. "Put down the gun." The younger man's hand twitched, but before he could draw, the sheriff fired. The sound split the night like a crack of thunder. The younger man fell hard, his weapon clattering to the floor. The older man didn't move. He just closed his eyes for a moment and raised his hands in surrender. The girl gasped, stumbling back against the table. Tom rushed to her side, gently pulling her close. "It's done," he said softly. "You're safe now." The sheriff kept his gun on the older man. "Tie him up," he said. "We'll take him back to town come morning." Tom nodded and found an old rope by the barn door. The older man didn't resist. He just looked at the girl, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "That ring," he said quietly, "you keep it. It won't buy peace, but maybe it'll remind you who you came from." Tom glanced at the sheriff, then reached into the man's coat and took the ring back. He handed it to the girl, pressing it gently into her hand. "Your mom would want you to keep it," he said. "It's part of who you are." She stared down at it, the gold warm against her skin, the firelight dancing over its surface. "Thank you," she whispered, though her voice shook. The sheriff led the older man outside, his lantern casting a small circle of light on the snow. Tom stayed behind, his gaze falling to the trapdoor. He knelt and lifted it open. Her brother blinked up at him, dazed but alive. "It's all right, little man," Tom said softly. "You can come out now." She hurried to her brother, helping him up and wrapping the blanket tight around his shoulders. He looked weak, pale, but there was a spark of color back in his cheeks. When he saw the sheriff outside, he looked at his sister and asked in a faint voice, "Are they gone?" She smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "They're gone," she said. "You're safe." The night slowly settled again. The sheriff returned after tying the prisoner in the barn, saying he'd ride back to town at first light. The cabin smelled of smoke and snow, of old wood and fear fading away. Tom helped patch the door where it had splintered, then sat by the fire, his face lined with exhaustion. For a long time no one spoke. The flames whispered softly, and the storm outside grew quiet. Finally, the girl looked at Tom and said, "I didn't know about Mama's ring. I didn't know it was taken." Tom nodded slowly. "I didn't either, not at first. But I found records when I worked up north. The name of the man who sold it matched Carter's. I figured I could make things right if I got it back." "But they thought you stole it," she said. He sighed. "Folks are quick to believe what they're told, especially when it comes to men like me." She studied him for a moment, the shadows playing across his face. "You risked everything for it," she said. Tom's eyes softened. "It wasn't just for the ring. It was for your family. Your mama once helped mine when times were hard. I owed her more than I could ever pay back." The words hit her like a wave she didn't see coming. She'd always thought of Tom as just a quiet neighbor who kept to himself, not someone carrying a debt of gratitude deep enough to risk his life. "Thank you," she said again, barely finding her voice. He gave a faint smile. "You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me you'll take care of your brother." "I will," she said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The sheriff dozed lightly in a chair by the door, his hat tipped low. Tom stayed awake, watching the fire die down. The first light of dawn began to push through the frosted window, gray and pale. When morning finally came, he helped the sheriff load the prisoner onto the wagon. The snow crunching underfoot, the girl and her brother stood in the doorway. wrapped in a single blanket, watching as they prepared to leave. Tom paused before climbing aboard. "You still have some of that medicine left?" She nodded. "Enough for a few more days." "Good. Keep the fire burning, and make sure he drinks plenty of water. The fever should break soon." She nodded again, her throat tight. "Will we see you again?" He looked away toward the horizon, where the pale sun was beginning to rise over the snowfields. "Maybe," he said after a long pause. "If the road leads me back this way." She wanted to ask him to stay, to thank him properly, but the words wouldn't come. He climbed onto the wagon beside the sheriff. The horses started forward, their breath hanging in the cold air, as they disappeared down the road. The girl felt the weight of everything that had happened, pressed down on Hertha: fear, the loss, the relief. She turned back toward the cabin. It felt smaller now, but warmer somehow. The ring in her hand glowed faintly in the sunlight. A piece of her mother's love brought back home. Her brother coughed weakly. She hurried to his side, helping him back to bed. He smiled at her, tired but grateful. "You didn't let them take it," he whispered. "No," she said softly. "And we're not going to lose anything else." That night, when the storm finally cleared for good, she stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The valley lay silent beneath a white blanket, untouched and peaceful for the first time in days. Somewhere far off, she thought she heard the distant echo of hoofbeats fading into the distance. She wondered where Tom was headed, what kind of road lay before him. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that for one night, when it counted most, he had come back. She went inside and placed the ring in the small box again, setting it near the fire. It caught the light like a memory of her mother's laughter, of her brother's fragile smile, of Tom standing tall against the storm as the flames crackled. She felt something shift inside her, something steady and strong. The world was still hard and cold, but she understood now that real love wasn't measured in gold or medicine or what could be traded. It was in the quiet choices made when no one was watching, in the courage to stand and protect what little one had left. The wind outside softened to a sigh, brushing against the window like a whisper of thanks. She smiled faintly and sat beside her brother, holding his hand until he drifted into sleep. The days that followed were slow but kind. Her brother's fever broke 2 mornings later, and by the week's end, he was walking again. The sheriff sent word from town that the men were locked up and Carter's gang scattered. The valley was safe for now, though folks still talked about what happened at the cabin that winter. Some said Tom left for the north again. Others that he'd found work near the mines. No one knew for sure, but each time she looked at the ring, shining faintly against the firelight, she remembered the man who had risked his life to return it tanned, the promise she'd made to never forget. Where she came from, winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the first shoots of green began to push through the frost. The girl worked the small field outside the cabin, her brother helping as best he could. Life went on, rough but steady. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the hills gold, she sat on the porch, the ring hanging from a string around her neck. The breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of pine and thawing soil. She thought of her mother, of Tom, of the sheriff who'd stood his ground. So much had been taken, yet so much had been given back. She closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, "We're all right now." The mountains in the distance glowed soft and blue under the setting sun. The land, quiet and wide, seemed to breathe again. And in that stillness, she felt the strength of every hardship that had brought her here, the courage of her family, the kindness of strangers, the unbroken will of a heart that refused to give up, somewhere far away. A lone rider moved along the ridge, heading toward the fading light. But in the cabin below, peace had finally found its way home.